Are you feeling burned out, at the end of your rope, sick and tired of being sick and tired? It's a common feeling, one that has only been exacerbated through the confusing on-again, off-again world we've been living in the past few years. If you're looking for answers to help you on your own journey, or perhaps your employee team members, coaching clients, friends, others, today's episode is just what the doctor ordered. Welcome to the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, co-founder of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. Today's guest is renowned leadership coach and author of the new book, From Burnout to Bliss, Kelly Meerbott. She's been transforming America's top CEOs' personal and professional lives and handcrafted profitable business strategies for thousands of corporations worldwide. But today, she's here just for us. If you pop over to our website, you'll see a version of her personal mission statement where she states, "I am here with no other agenda than to hold you accountable for your fullest potential and success." I love that. And for our longtime listeners, you know that is absolutely consistent with our calling to be a catalyst, making a positive difference in our world without being used up or burned out in the process. Today, we'll dig into that more fully. Speaking of burnout, most organizations are looking for ways to effectively enhance the way in which they support the physical and mental health of their employee team members in a way that it's not just another program of the month. If that's you, we'd be honored to discuss ways in which we can integrate nationally board certified health and wellness coaching in a personalized manner to help create positive, lasting, and this is important, meaningful change. We've been partnering with organizations large and small since 2007. And we'd be happy to discuss ideas, do some brainstorming anytime. Just shoot us an email, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, and we'll get a call set up. Now it's time to light a fire without getting burned, or in this case, burned out, with Kelly Meerbott in the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. Kelly Meerbott, it is a privilege to have you here. Really exciting topic, so important. Your book's on fire. Let's talk about it. Why all the attention on burnout right now? I mean, it is top of mind. It is in the headlines. What do you think's driving that?
I think the pandemic drove it. I mean, I've been studying burnout since 2018, and I saw this as the second wave of the pandemic, that and mental health. And I'll take you to a statistic that the Society of Human Resource Management put out. They found that people who were working remotely were working 48 minutes additional every day. So all of those myths about, they have a side hustle or they have this, that, and the other thing, it's not true. It's that they were working so much more. In addition to, managing their families, their homes, their lives, now we've moved the office into the house, which is great for a lot of people, especially introverts like me. I love it, right? And you don't have any commute, which is fantastic. But at the same time, there's no separation between work and life. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a colleague who is fantastic. She's a high-level executive at Salesforce, actually. And she's an extrovert. And I remember talking to her during the pandemic, and she's like, "I can't do this anymore, Kelly." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I'm doing my work on our dining room table where I feed my family, and there's literally no separation." And we did something very simple, where I told her that at the end of every day, she needs to pack up everything that she worked on and literally put it in a Rubbermaid container where she could that click, it's very ASMR.
Yes.
And that's the end of it. And you put it aside. And now the dining room table becomes the dining room table, not the workspace. So there's some separation in that. Now, the other great thing is if you have a separate room, like I do, I'm fortunate enough to do that where it's in my basement. And unless I'm doing laundry, I don't have to come down into the office, to create some mental and physical separation. So I think part of it is what I said, additional work, 48 minutes extra a day, but also those blurred lines of home versus work, that there's no longer a physical separation. It's all one. So because it's a different thing, you've got to shift your mindset. You have to figure out ways to create those boundaries so that your mind can shut down and you can focus on life, because, we're not here to work. We're here to live.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's interesting that idea of the click to end the day. I remember my dad had about a 25-minute commute, and worked in the same job for 25 years or so. And I remember asking him, "Did you ever think about moving closer?" Because there were plenty of options. It wasn't a remote type thing. And he said, "No, I need that. I like that 25-minute barrier." And it's probably very much what you're talking about, of winding down the workday and then getting ready for the home life. And you created that through that click, but that's been eliminated for a lot of people.
Well, yeah. And, another thing I've told my clients to do is to get up out of wherever their workspace is and walk around the block. So they've created a commute, right?
Yeah.
It creates that separation from work and life. And it's just that simple spatial creation. Yeah. And there's some brain that we'll go back to the click that clicks, where it's like, okay, I'm done with work, let me take a quick walk around the block to separate that energy, much like your dad had with the 25-minute commute. Which, when I'm working with a client, one of the things I say is make your car your classroom. So I work with a lot of high-ranking officers in the military, and a lot of them don't live on base, and when they leave, I want them to either turn on the radio and listen to some great music, or, listen to an audiobook or something to feed their brains so that they can create, again, that separation. Because when the lines become blurred, that's where the stress happens. That's where the tension occurs.
Yeah, that's good. How did this come up for you? How did you venture into this idea of burnout? Is this something that's drawn you for many years? Something you went through personally? What was the magnet that brought you and burnout together for this book that you've put out?
So, first of all, I was running into a lot of clients, and again, it was high-ranking officers in the military who literally do not have a normal work day. They're in the business, unfortunately, of war, and that's only one portion of what they do.
Sure.
They do humanitarian missions. They were head of Moderna and Pfizer in the vaccine development. They do tech development, but their lives are not their own. And I was running into people being burnt out and not having a good, I don't like to say work-life balance, because I think the word balance creates a pressure. Oh, I'm out of balance. There must be something wrong with me. I like to say it's a work-life flow. And when I say that, what I mean is, if you're working, 5-10-hour days, then you're out of flow, right? But if you have let's just say a quote unquote normal day, where you're waking up, you're doing your workout, you're doing your meditation, you're setting yourself up for success, you go to work, you finish your work day at 5:00, you're able to put that separation and take that pressure out of the energy of the day and go home and have a great meal with your family or whatever, then you're in flow. Right. So sometimes you're out of flow, sometimes you're in flow. To me, that's a little bit more gentle and doesn't cause extra pressure.
Right.
I'm in addition to being burnt out, I'm out of balance.
Right.
Well, that doesn't help anything. You know what I mean? So if we're in flow, it's a little bit better. And some days we're out of flow. So how did it show up for me? I'll tell you. So I'm an athlete and I love to work out. And one of the things I've invested in is great socks. So you're an Ironman, right? So have you heard of the Balaga socks? Have you heard of those?
I've not, huh?
Okay. So Balaga makes these socks that are supposed to be,
of course. Yeah.
Right. They're supposed to be blister free. Well, they're not cheap socks. They're $14 socks. And my husband's working from home today. So as I'm saying this, I'm sure he's
rolling his eyes. You did what?
Well, I'm sure you've experienced this phenomenon, but my dryer was eating socks, and I would get in there and be like, okay, I put you both in. Where's your mate? I don't understand. Well, what happened was I was folding laundry and I couldn't find a sock, and I burst into tears. And I was like, where?
Yes.
Sitting on the floor, and my husband came in and he said, I want you to look at yourself. You're crying over a sock. What is going on? You're burnt out. Like, this is not good. And then, I started trying to understand how burnout manifests, and it manifests in many ways, and a lot of them physically, irritability, short-temperedness, and it's the result of chronic stress. And that chronic stress basically pushing down your emotions and not allowing them to live their lives. And what I mean by that is emotions are energy, right? So even if you look at the word emotion, it's energy in motion. And what we know about emotions is the emotional cycle is 90 seconds at most, unless we interrupt it or suppress it. When you suppress it, it literally becomes like poison in your body because there's nowhere to go. So that's what was happening with me, is I was feeling this stress and these emotions and going, nope, can't deal with that right now, because there's more stress coming on top of it and more stress. And what it happened, the way I say it to my clients is it's like emotional constipation, because they're all backed up and stuck, right? So we need to give it a way to kind of move out of your system, which is why I started like working on these techniques, and then beta testing them with over 300 high ranking officers in the military, because that is literally the toughest demographic we have besides law enforcement, and they're dealing with trauma on top of that. So I wanted to figure out ways to, no matter where they were, whether they were stationed at Fort Bragg or overseas in the Middle East, they could do a technique that did not require anything other than themselves, whether it was breathing or my favorite, which is the primal scream, which I love. And I'll talk to your audience about how to do that if you want. But it's fantastic, and especially now with everything going on, it's really important that we have ways to move those emotions and create relief, because otherwise we're a bunch of pressure cookers walking around ready to explode. And then we have
turn out good. Yeah.
Right. And let's look at our world, what's happening. And when you don't have a place for those emotions to go, you have horrible things that happen, i.e. mass shootings in schools. Yeah. That's the extreme end of it. So, why not do things that can create relief along the way, so we can avoid that, and you can actually live a life that is fulfilling, rich, and, dare I say, blissful.
You've piqued everybody's interest on this primal scream thing. I wrote it down. We're going to put it aside just for a second. I want to address one other question, and then we can come back to it, because everybody's going, wait, what's this primal? I want to do a primal scream. So you cover the 5 stages of burnout in your book. Let's look at these stages, and you provide it basically as the initial burnout and then chronic burnout. Before we hit the stages, can you describe more generically the difference between the initial burnout phase and the chronic burnout phase?
Yeah. So the chronic burnout phase, let's start there, because I've already kind of touched on it. It's that chronic stress, right? It's is it time-based? Is it 6 months? Or can you drop into chronic stress in a week? It could be different for everybody. It really depends on the kind of role you're having. Like, let's look at the healthcare professionals, who I literally equate to, service members in the military after what they went through in COVID.
Absolutely.
Those wonderful, magnificent humans who literally saved us. It was nonstop over. We're still not out of it. Right. So I would say 2 years, that's a huge time frame versus, somebody who may be coming in and developing an app, which that moves at the speed of thought. And again, that could be, you're on deadline for 2 weeks, and then you're burnt out because you're working 24-hour days or whatever it is. So it's different. It's also different for how sensitive you are. Like, I'm an introvert, right? That doesn't mean I'm shy. That means when I put a lot of external energy out, it drains me. And what I know I need to do is, number one, take care of myself and have downtime, right? Versus an extrovert who gets kind of enrichment and fulfillment from putting out that energy. So let me give you an example. Back in 2016, I spoke at the Pennsylvania Conference for Women. There were 9,000 women there. After that, it was 3 days of rest for Kelly, because that's a lot of energy. And on top of being an introvert, I'm an empath, which means I feel very, very, very deeply. So all of that energy hitting my central nervous system is a lot, and I need to make sure I recalibrate. So going back to your question, chronic is, well, let's use the extreme of, the military, the healthcare professionals, or, there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley who burn themselves out chronically, and a lot of it comes from self-worth and proving that you're worth it. A lot of high performers are like, look, I'm superhuman. I can do what the average person can't do. And they're putting themselves into burnout. Right. Versus somebody who's really balanced and understands. Like, I have a new client that said to me, I'm not in love with working. And I was like, okay, tell me what you mean. He's like, I'm okay with showing up at work, doing my work, getting a paycheck, and leaving at 5:30, because I have other things in my life that are fulfilling. Whereas a lot of people who are in burnout are using that to validate themselves and their value. So
that makes good sense. As you look at the 5 stages, are there, I don't want to read them to everyone, but are there 1 or 2 in there that you think would be helpful to highlight as a red flag for people to say, oh my gosh, I think that's me. Maybe I'm moving toward the chronic phase?
Yeah. So, I'll tell you, one of them is irritability and short-temperedness. Another one is crying. Losing pleasure in things that you used to love, not having energy for things that for instance, one of the things one of my clients used to love to do was marathons. And she was just like, yeah, I'm not even, like, she'd look at her running shoes in disgust after 20 years of loving to run. So like things like that you were passionate about, all of a sudden becoming like a burden and having a disgust with it. Another thing I equate it to is in that initial stage. If anybody's seen the movie Pleasantville, which is a movie with Reese Witherspoon back in the day, and in the beginning it's black and white, and then they move into color. It's almost like your life becomes black and white. Like there's no flavor.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
There's literally no joy, no sparkle, no pleasure in it. An extreme version, and this is, again, I'm going to give a trigger warning to any people who have addiction issues, but I had a client who would get in bed every night. She was a high performer, C-suite executive for a very large tech company in Silicon Valley. And she would get in bed, and she described her burnout like an electrical charge going through her body. So like laying down and finally getting her central nervous system to try to quiet. And she couldn't, because there was all this energy underneath it. Again, remember, emotional constipation. It's that energy looking for a way to get out. And unfortunately, before she came to me, the way she would relax herself was a bottle of wine, a Xanax, and a bath. It's not
tough combo. Yeah, exactly. That's not a long-term solution.
That's not healthy, so we put techniques in place so that she could create space between her work and her home. She asked for help. That's another thing that contributes to burnout, not asking for help, thinking you can do it all yourself, and again, that's a self-worth issue. It's like, I'm Superwoman. I don't need you, Brad. I can do all this myself. No, you can't. Right. No, you can't. And what I tell my clients is, there's an African proverb that said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You can get more accomplished when you pull people in on your team. I mean, you're an Iron Man, you couldn't do it without your team. It's the same thing. You got to employ, and people want to help if you ask them, and you empower them to do it. They may not do it exactly the way you do it, but if they get to the end state you want, why does it matter how they get there? So, those are a few things I would say. Really pay attention to, and pay attention to the signals your body's giving you. Like when I said to her, okay, tell me what emotions and physical sensations arise when you're in your chronic state of burnout. And it was clenching her jaw, tension in her neck and shoulders, that electrical charge under the skin when she was laying down. Your body will tell you. Your body will tell you, and you need to use that and your emotions as a guidance system. And I'll pull a quote from the wonderful Brene Brown, who is a gift to humanity, in my opinion. In her book, Atlas of the Heart, she makes the distinction that we believe as humans, we're thinking beings that sometimes feel. We're not. We're feeling beings that sometimes think. And we discount our emotions, especially in this country, as a weakness. I see it as a guidance system and an asset. If you're not using your emotions and your body to guide you, then you're missing out on valuable resources that you have within yourself. So, the work is really tuning into that.
Okay. So the tuning in piece, it sounds like you're reminding us, we all know this inherently, but you're reminding us very clearly when those emotions come, don't run from them. Don't be afraid of them. You also don't have to dive into them. Take them as information. Say, okay, I'm crying over a sock right now. What does this tell me? This is very valuable information. Yeah. And then maybe pull that other friend, cohort, coach, counselor, therapist, spouse, sister, brother, whatever, in and say, okay, so I cried over a sock yesterday. Would you have time to kind of chat this through? Is that where you're taking this? Like that? Don't get scared by the emotions. Don't get freaked out by the emotions, and don't avoid the emotions. Use that as information to make the next best step. Yes.
So I equate them to an alarm clock, waking you up to something that's out of balance.
Nice. I like that.
And for me, I do say lean into the emotions. I do, because it's 90 seconds. And let me give you an example. So I had a high-ranking officer in the military who told me, now, when I work with the military, it's all focused on emotions and emotional well-being and emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And so teaching them to understand that their emotions are an asset, not a liability, is a mental jump for them, because they've been conditioned in the opposite direction. And what I have to explain to them is they're not going to end up in a ball in a dark room, sucking their thumb, crying into tissues if they lean into their emotions. Because again, emotions are energy, right? So this officer comes on and he's like, Kelly, I'm a stoic. And I'm like, okay. I said, well, tell me about your family life, because you and I both know babies are born with two fears: fear of falling and fear of loud noises. Everything else is learned. So if you're watching your family and your dad and grandfather, like his were stoics, your child is most likely to grow up a stoic, right? So I said to him, all right, well, tell me the last time you had an emotional expression. And he told me a story about how he brought his 7-year-old son to Arlington to see some of the grave sites of some fallen members of his company. And I noticed, because we were on Zoom, he was stationed in Germany, that he started to cry. Well, what he didn't know was off camera, I set my stopwatch, because I had told him an emotional cycle from start to finish is 90 seconds. So I said to him, all right, so you're getting emotional. We're not going to interrupt that. I want you to just sit with it and let it flow through. And when you're ready, you raise your hand and we'll continue. So I sat there and just allowed him to have his feelings, and he raised his hand. And I looked at him and I said, I want you to know that was less than 60 seconds. It only extends when we suppress it or interrupt it. That's where the emotional constipation comes from, right? Like, obviously I'm not advocating for him to be in the middle of a conference room with a bunch of 4-star generals, sitting on the floor, holding hands, saying, I'm passing around the tissue box. That's not what I'm advocating for. But if you have an emotion, expression rise up, and you suppress it at that moment because it's inappropriate, then we need to go back immediately and make sure it has its cycle, so we don't get into burnout. And he told me in our next session, he said, my wife is really, really happy today. And I said, why is that? And he said, I rolled over this morning and I looked at her and I said, I'm feeling really happy today. And she looked at him and said, that just made my day. because he's a stoic, right? And for him, an emotional expression was, I'm feeling really happy today.
And by comparison with what she'd been hearing for 10 or 15 or however many years.
Or not hearing.
Yeah.
Because he was internalizing it.
Let's pop that primal scream in now. This is a good time. So what do we do with this thing? How does this work?
Okay, so this actually comes from primal scream therapy, which was a little bit radical in its time. But again, for me, as somebody who was conditioned as a child to be stoic and not express emotion, this thing is so helpful. But I want to give a disclaimer. Warn whoever you live with before you do this, because I always beta test these, and I remember doing it. My poor husband Brian came running in and was like, "What's happening?" And I was like, "I'm just testing a technique." But there's a couple of ways you can do it. My favorite way is to get in my car because it's soundproof, and I turn on Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. And when he screams all aboard, I open my mouth and I just let it rip. And the cycle has ended when you feel something almost unlock and move in you. Another way you can do it, which is a way I did when I did my TED Talk back in April, because I was extremely stressed, as one of the most stressful, traumatic experiences. And I'm saying traumatic because it was the story of me overcoming and surviving 3 sexual assaults in college.
Wow.
I have to retell that story over and over again and memorize it without...
And just the leading up to it, having to cycle it over and over and over and over and over. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Where my psychiatrist, Dr. Phillips, the man, I love that man. He's helped me with so many things. He said to me, if I knew this topic was the topic you were picking, I would have said,
no.
Too late. Here we are.
Oh, goodness.
Was I grabbed a pillow and I got on the bed and I straddled the pillow and I buried my face in it and just screamed. You know what I mean? So it would muffle the sound and not disturb the other patrons in the hotel. Another way you can do it is just to, plant your feet and just open your mouth and scream. And it's about moving the energy. That's all we're looking to do.
And it's 3 seconds. It's Aussie time. It depends.
It's whatever. It's whatever works for you.
Okay.
You know what I mean? For me, it could be 3 seconds because I'm practiced in moving my energy. For you, it could be 15 seconds. It could be 30 seconds, whatever. Just make sure that you're doing it in a place where, number one, if you can get a sound like your car, that's great.
Yeah.
If you can do it in your home, warn your spouse. Of course, my animals always come running when I scream.
Totally.
But yeah, it's a really easy way to do that. And the other thing is it calms your central nervous system down because you're a PhD, the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in our body, right? And it goes from the stem of our skull all the way down into our stomach, right? And vibration is what calms your central nervous system down. So yawning, singing, humming, screaming can all calm that down. So that's what's happening biologically in your body. Okay. I like it because also it's kind of fun to scream if you.
That's why we like sports so much. You get to go out there and just yell, go, come on, Rams, let's do this thing.
Yes, let's do it. Let's effing go.
Totally,
you know what I mean?
Totally. All right. So let's talk about your book title, because when I first saw it, I was like, that's a big promise, Kelly. Like that, you're not just saying I'm going to help you moderate your burnout. Of course, that's kind of too boring of a title. You're saying we're going from burnout to bliss. Like, is that really a thing? Like, can we really get from burnout to bliss?
Yeah, I believe you can. But it's all about the belief. You know what I mean? Thoughts become a belief when you keep thinking about them, right? That's when they come in. So you have to go in suspending disbelief, and all of these things are beta tested on 300 high-ranking officers in the military. Like I said, the hardest demographic that is highly stressed. And I will tell you, as an English lit major, the alliteration of burnout to bliss was like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And part of the reason why, I put these techniques in is because, first of all, they're tested. We tested them. And the second thing is you can do them anywhere. A good laugh, a good cry, you can do that. A 20-second hug is fantastic, and of course, if you look at, there's a couple of books that have come out that, also reiterate these techniques. But yeah, I believe you can. But here's the thing, you've got to do the work. I can't take you there. I can tell you I've done it with techniques and with the military and all of that, and they're tested and they do work, but you have to put them into practice. That's the one thing I say to my clients, is that you're the uncommon denominator. There's a reason why I have a 90% success rate. I know what I bring to the table. The only thing I can't control is you. So if you buy this book and it collects dust and you don't do anything with it, well, of course, you're not going to get blissful. But if you put in your mind, my intention is to relieve my burnout, to heal it, to get to the blissful state, you've already set yourself up for success because your mind is aligned for that intention.
Right. All right. I don't know if you're peeking at my questions here or what, but you just set the next question up perfectly, because as coaches, clinicians, counselors, et cetera, can attest, there's a big difference between me saying, I want to do A, and so I'm going to move forward, and recognizing it in someone else and wanting to come alongside them. So any tips for those folks that are in that role? Maybe it's friends, maybe it's coworkers, maybe it's employees that work for their organization, maybe they're coaching clients, et cetera. Are there ways to tenderly touch on this and just without, because we know it doesn't help to tell people. It never helps to say, Kelly, you should do such and such. Well, you're like, thanks, but no thanks. So any tips for the person that you're seeing all these burnout signs and they're not seeming to want to is the wrong word, but nothing's changing. Any tips for what we can do in that case?
Yeah. Model the behavior yourself. Model it yourself. The way I coach is very different, Brad. Like people will say to me all the time, like, I've met executive coaches before and you're not like them. And to me, that's a high compliment. But the reason they say that is because I leverage my mistakes, my own life, the lives of my clients. Of course, I never, obviously the story I shared with you, I didn't reveal who the person was. Sure. But I do it through storytelling. And I always say to my clients in the beginning, I'm going to tell you a lot of stories, and I'm not doing it to egoically impress my beliefs on you. I don't believe in that. I do it to share information so that you, Brad, can make the best decision for yourself. And once you make that choice, and our jobs as, I believe, coaches, therapists, psychiatrists, is to lead them to it and show them an example of it. Right? Telling is one thing, but words don't teach. Right. Words don't teach, but our examples will. Right? I never ask my clients to do anything I haven't done myself. Ever. Never, ever. I'm never going to ask them to do that, because that's not fair and it's hypocritical.
Let's talk about hard work. Obviously, that's a key component with this whole burnout thing in the first place. So for many of us, it's not just a thing. It's our self-identification. I work hard, and it the whole side hustle, the lexicon of that phrase, so much in vogue of everybody saying, oh, you got your side hustle. How do we balance the desire to consistently work hard? We don't want to change that. That's a good quality. How do we balance that without crossing over into the burnout piece?
Understand that you are not your job. That is something you do. It's not who you are. And when I say that to people in the military, because that job is all consuming. It's all consuming. It's almost like I'm ripping away their sense of self. But that's just one small sliver of who they are. And it isn't even who they are. It's what they do. It's what they've chosen to do with their lives. So understand, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that's who you are. That's what you've chosen to do. I will tell you a really quick, funny story. My colleague, Tiffany Tavares, who is a vice president of community outreach at Wells Fargo, she reports to the CFO. She and I, when we would network together prior to the pandemic, and she's a little bit more direct with people, but when people would come up to us and say, "What do you do?" Like, I hate that question in networking, because I'm like, is that really what you want to know? What do I do? Or do you want to know who I am as a human? And Tiffany would say to them, "Go away, think of a better question, and come back to us." Because it sounds harsh, but think, this is all conditioning that we're talking about. This is the way we've been taught to behave. Like, you go to a networking event, it's like, "Brad, what do you do? What do you do?" I don't want to know that. I want to know the human behind the title. I want to know what brought you to this. I want to know what was it in your soul that said, "Yes, Brad, I want you to be a PhD. I want you to, do all of these Ironmen that you did. Why did you do this podcast? What called to you?" That's more informative. I don't know if I can curse on this. I don't give a shit what you do. Doesn't matter if you're a janitor or you're CEO. If you do it with love, with empathy, with compassion, that's what I want to know about. Right. So I think, again, going back to blurred lines that we talked about in the beginning, I think a lot of times we put too much emphasis on what it is we do, not who we are. That's why when I interface with somebody on LinkedIn, and let's use men, for example, what I'm seeing a lot of now is husband, father, dog lover, then something, because that's kind of the human that they're made up of. They're not just this one thing. So, I think it's wrapping up your idea of self in what you do.
And you think the hard work piece is tied to the what you do? Because I'm thinking, and I may be off base, I have not studied this like you have, but I'm thinking the hard work piece is who you are in a lot of ways. Whether you're working in the yard, whether you're training your dog, whether you said you love working out, so whether you're in the gym, it's like who I am in many cases. And a lot of our listeners are probably nodding their head and go, yeah, that's who I am. I just work hard. It's not for money. Sometimes it's for money. It's not for getting my yard up to speed. It's not for Strava. It's just all of those. I just, if I'm in, I'm in. So how does that balance out with the burnout piece? Or does that person need to be more alert to those warning signs that you talked about earlier?
I agree. I think they need to be more alert, again, going back to attunement. But I also think about words creating your reality. Like when I work out, I love it. I don't call it hard work. I just, for me, working out is play. It's a way to move my body with joy. So why do we have to call it hard work at all? Why not call it playtime? I always joke, like, I go to Soul Cycle a lot, and there's a bunch of inspirational words on the walls in the studio. And there's one phrase that I think people always forget, and they say it's a cardio party. I'm like, are you working hard at a party? I'm not. I'm playing, I'm yelling, I'm dancing to music. To me, it's not hard work, and for you, I would challenge you to say, when you're in that flow state of being in the Ironman, you're moving through space. Is that hard work?
No, I think, if you look at She Sent Me High's research on flow, which you've used that word so well, it's when you're stretching yourself just inside or just outside your capacity. And you lose yourself in that because of where you've placed yourself. You're not sitting on your couch. You're not watching Netflix. You're stretching, and yet you're not going beyond. You're not to the point where you're just in agony.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's that balance.
If work is agony, red flag.
Yeah.
Buy Kelly Journal. You know what I mean? Or call me and we'll get you out of there and put you into a place where work is fulfilling.
Right.
Again, we shouldn't be living to work. Work should be fueling the rich lives that we want to have. It should be funding that.
Right. Right, right. Yeah, we use that phrase a lot. That's your grant process if you're in academia. That's your GoFundMe if you're in the other aspects of the world. Well, let's talk about stress for a second, because a lot of what we're talking about, stress is the undercurrent. It gets a bad rap. The reality, though, of the actual word, the utilization of the word, is that's what moves us forward. We had Dr. Kelly McGonigal from Stanford on. She wrote The Upside of Stress. You've probably read it. She's amazing. It's when stress exceeds our physiological or psychological capacity that we have the problem. That's when the problem kicks in. So what would you encourage folks to do, or would you encourage them to do things to strengthen the capacity so that that same amount of stress is not putting them over the top? Or is that not something you dive into?
I mean, I do. And I think where my mind is going is that there are two types of stress. There's eustress and distress. Eustress, EU stress, and then distress, right? Eustress is when you're at the Super Bowl and you're so amped up with the adrenaline that you catch that pass and run it for 90 yards. And again, that's where the flow state comes in, right? And you're out of your body. And like, it's just, eustress is the good stress. It's the things that drive forward. It's what helps us make deadlines to fulfilling projects we're doing at work. Distress is what contributes to burnout. It's that where the central nervous system is hit again, and you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's that kind of feeling. So I think, testing yourself and thinking about, okay, what is this, eustress or distress? Eustress we can use as the fuel to power things forward. It's positive. Distress is when we're sending up the SOS, mayday, mayday, going down. We don't want to be in that state, right? And then you've also got to be in tune with yourself, like in high stress situations, i.e. like there was a time when my mom was rushed to the hospital. I'm one of those people that overfunctions when I'm in a stressful situation. There are some people that underfunction, like, well, it's the deer in the headlights, right? For me, I'm like, where's the patient advocate? Why hasn't the doctor seen? Okay, my sister, call dad, you know what I mean? I'm the one directing. But again, that's a stress management thing. So you've got to, first of all, know how you function under stress. What happens? Do you do things to cope with the distress, right, that are unhealthy, i.e., let's go back to my client, the Xanax, the bottle of wine, the bath, right? Not healthy. How can we switch something that's more healthy? And then once the quote unquote stressful situation is past, remind yourself that you survived. Remind yourself that you survived. You're still alive. You're okay.
And you're moving forward.
Great. And I think, putting yourself in stressful situations that are safe and, modulated, meaning kind of managed. I mean, I have a very high stress tolerance, and it's because of the situations I've been in, but it's also because of the work I do. I don't just work with the military. I work with Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, TSA, DOT. Those are all people that are burnt out, but they're also dealing with stress on a daily basis. So if you can figure out what your stress tolerance is and where your breaking point is, and staying within that kind of region, and then making the distinction, is this like, okay, I'll give you an example. Right before my TED Talk, I literally, I said a prayer, right? And then there was a full-length mirror behind the stage right before I walked through the curtains. And I looked at myself and I go, you got this. And I knuckle bumped myself.
I love it.
I went on stage and I had told them, I said, you need to give me 3 seconds to plant my feet and breathe. I did that. And then the person in the audio booth signaled me and went like this, and then started the clock, because you have 18 minutes to do it. I don't know what happened after that, Brad. I can't tell you. I mean, I can tell you I cried. I remember that. I remember my watch clasp came off and I fixed it. And I also remember stumbling over one phrase. That's all I remember. I was completely out of my body. That's eustress. That's an example of eustress, right? Distress is the day before, when I completely blew the dress rehearsal. When I stood in front of that camera, the lights went on and I forgot my words after 6 months of memorizing it. Right? But here's what I know from my friends that are actors on Broadway and all of that, because I was panicked and I texted all of them and I was like, isn't it true that if you blow the dress rehearsal, the performance is great? And they were all like, yeah, that's the thing. Relax. You want things to go wrong in the dress rehearsal. So again, that's a perfect example of distress, because I was like, oh my God, I've worked on this forever. Here we are, and I'm blowing it. And I will tell you, prior to that talk, I meditated twice in the morning. I said a ton of prayers because I'm connected to source. Like, that is something that's really important to me. And I made sure I didn't drink coffee. I got a good night's sleep. I drank my water. I didn't, took a shower, controlled my set and setting and set myself up for success. And that is a perfect example of distress versus eustress.
And again, I think you're cheating. You somehow are seeing through the screen over the corner of my computer, because the next question is exactly what you're talking about. We talk about the 4 cornerstones of health and wellness all the time: move, fuel, rest, and connect. When I'm feeling burned out, if I'll look burned out, I'm going to use that in quotes because I may not quite hit what you're talking about. But when I'm feeling like I'm burned out, I look at those 4, and almost always there's some deficiency there. I haven't been exercising. I haven't been sleeping consistently. I'm not fueling effectively. I'm eating junk, or I'm not connecting primarily to my wife. We're very close, and my connection with her has a big influence on how I feel a lot of times with that burnout. You've touched on some of those with your TED Talk piece. You talk about prayer. You talk about the water. You talk about being careful with caffeine intake, getting a good sleep. Are those core pieces that you bring to the table with your clients in your book, et cetera, to say, wait, let's look at the basics. We don't have to go into high tech here. Let's first look at move, fuel, rest, connect. And then if those don't fix it, then we can look at some other things. Is that a key piece?
Yes. And I will tell you, I get that from my father. He's a former professional golfer on the PGA Tour at 80 top 10 finishes. He had a bigger influence on me than I would have liked to have said before, but he did. And when my clients come into my life, I always tell them, I'm going to treat you like a high performance athlete. And I want to give a caveat to that. I'm not a nutritionist, nor am I a certified professional personal trainer. I'm going to pull from my own life, right? But when I'm not eating properly, not getting a good night's sleep, not drinking my water,
the core things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Here's the thing. If we can get sleep regulated, and this is something I learned from Dr. Eric Gentry when I took his trauma class at the Arizona Trauma Institute, one of the things that he says is with his trauma patients, if he can get sleep regulated, it's easier to get everything in line, right? So the first thing I would start with, if you're feeling burnt out, is how is your sleep?
Absolutely.
Right? When I was feeling burnt out, and I have sleep apnea, so my sleep is tracked by doctors and all of that. One of the things I realized was I was getting 5 to 6 hours of sleep. Yep. I'm a 7 to 8 hour person,
as are most people. Yep.
And anybody who says they're not, or that sleep,
right? You're probably wrong. Yeah.
Great. When I said this to my sleep doctor, I was like, I have military people who are like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Right. She's like, tell them if they don't sleep, they'll get dead. Yeah. And I'm like, got it. Right? That's true. So the first thing I say is if somebody comes on Zoom or if they're in front of me and I notice they're low energy, the next questions I ask is, how did you sleep last night? What's your nutrition like? Did you get your workout in? Have you done your meditation? Have you played? Meaning, that's something that as adults, we think we should let go of. But play, in my context, is doing something for the pure joy of doing it with no result or benefit in the background. It's just for the pure pleasure of doing it.
That's good. I like that. And yes, sleep. I'm glad you highlighted that further. We've had 4 sleep doctors, researchers, physicians, Dr. Winter and Dr. Singh most recently, and they're always our most popular episodes. I'm glad you're hitting that. Just got a couple more. One that came to mind as we were chatting is we've had some guests talk about HRV. So the variability of the heart rate. It's a great physiological assessment that you can do very simply in 1 or 2 minutes each morning. A lot of different tools and apps out there, so I won't specify one. But It tells you what's happening in your physiology. As your heart rate variability increases, that's a good thing. As it decreases, it means your body's kind of like, I'm shutting down here. This is not working. Have you utilized, maybe not HRV, but have you utilized any kind of physiological testing to help people see that these changes they're making are making changes internally?
Yes. And I'm laughing because I use this. Okay. So in my former life, I was in the media. I sold radio, but I was also an associate producer for a local news station. So I know what those organizations are about, and they're fear-based, right? So there was a stretch of time where I was watching news during the day and then getting in my car and listening to it on Sirius. And I did a test. I was like, let me see what each of these news stations do to my heart rate, just for fun in a 60-second period. MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News shot up my heart rate. The reason I say that is because a lot of my clients who are high performers are news junkies, right? Well, what happens with those organizations is they tap into the lowest vibration of humanity, which is fear, right? It's easy to
Sure.
get into.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Right. And that was something the news director said to me on my first day. And then he said, remember the 2 R's, ratings and revenue. Yeah. So what I recommend is a news fast, right? And that includes social media too.
My last question for you, my friend. You're going to have to ponder this one for a second. You've got a billboard, and you get to help the world with their burnout by putting something on this billboard. Now, obviously, people are driving by, so it can't be a paragraph. It can't probably even be a full sentence. It's just got to be, what do I see up there? So what would you put on that billboard to help the world as they drive on their commute this morning or home tonight? What gets said on that billboard?
Feeling burned out, and then my URL.
Oh, there we go. And we will have her URL in the description, folks. So pretend like you saw that billboard. Kelly, thank you so much. This was awesome. So important, critical timing, and appreciate what you're doing.
Brad, thank you for having me. And this is a fantastic podcast. You're doing such a great service to humanity. I'm glad that I was able to provide a moment in time for you and your listeners, and hopefully it served them.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Of course.
You feel better already, don't you? Thanks again to Kelly Meerbott for joining us to share her insights. We have included her contact information in the description if you'd like to learn more about her work or reach out to her for some further follow-up. Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. Next week's episode features Dr. Tina Seelig, taking us on the journey of good luck. Seriously, if you're looking for more luck in your life, there's actually research on how to go about it, and Dr. Seelig will lead the way. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions about your current or future coaching career. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We do have a training coming up you can tap into, or you can find additional resources on the website at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, it's time to be that catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. I'll speak with you soon on another episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.